For decades, pastors and prophecy teachers have told you that the mark of the beast is coming in the form of a physical device, a microchip, a scan, or a government implant. You've been warned not to receive a digital tattoo on your right hand or your forehead. But what if the Apostle John, when he wrote Revelation, wasn't looking at technology at all? What if he was looking at an anti-Shema, a corrupt dark mirror of an ancient Jewish law that most Christians completely miss? Revelation 13 is not describing an implant. It is describing whose you are. The object everyone argues about, the microchip, has no word behind it in John's vocabulary at all. The finding I am about to prove to you is simple. The mark of the beast is a state of allegiance, not a barcode. That is a dangerous claim, and to prove it, we don't look at modern technology. We must go back to the Judean desert, to the 1st century, and to the only scroll John's warning can properly be understood by. Let's awaken the text. A parchment came out of the ground at Wadi Murabba'at in the Judean desert, carrying Exodus 13 verses 1 to 3. Leather cases and inscribed strips came out of Qumran and out of Nahal Se'elim with it, Second Temple period, held now by the Israel Antiquities Authority, carrying Deuteronomy 6 and Exodus 13. That is the scroll in the title. It is Hebrew, it is Scripture, and the catalog is open to you tonight. You were told the mark of the beast is a counterfeit of that. That Revelation 13 takes the sign Moses commanded on the hand and the forehead and turns it inside out. It is a clean reading, and it has one problem. Moses did not write forehead, and the Greek Old Testament a 1st century reader actually held does not put John's forehead word there either. So here is the finding, before any of the proof for it. Revelation 13 is not describing a device, it is describing whose you are. The object everyone argues about, the implant, has no word behind it in this vocabulary at all. Whatever the mark turns out to be, it did not come out of John's Greek. John wrote metapon, forehead. It stands 8 times in the entire New Testament, and every one of the 8 is inside Revelation. In 4 of them, the thing on the forehead is God's seal or God's name. In 4 of them, it is the beast's mark or Babylon's name. 2 of the 8 name the mark by its absence, and that is still John putting it there. You can count it yourself. Every source in this episode is free and open to you tonight. Thayer, Strong's, Brown Driver Briggs, Brenton's Septuagint, the Israel Antiquities Authority Catalog, 8 moves. What is actually written on those strips? The 6 Hebrew words Moses wrote at Deuteronomy 6, verse 8. 5 English Bibles on that one verse. The Greek Old Testament at Deuteronomy 6, the Greek Old Testament at Ezekiel 9, the hand John named, the 8 verses and who owns each one, and the 2 words John used for 2 marks. A whole timetable was built on Revelation 13 quoting Deuteronomy 6. If the vocabulary does not carry, everything stacked on top of it is standing on an English sentence. Start with what is on the strips. Until you know that, you cannot say what a 1st century Jew saw when he looked at a hand and a forehead. The cheap answer is superstition. Amulets are common in the ancient world. They turn up all across the Eastern Mediterranean, and most of them carry nothing canonical. If these were that, they tell you nothing about a Jewish reader of Revelation. That is the first place a careful man goes, and it deserves its full weight. 2 limits on this, named before anyone else names them. I am not going to date the individual parchment for you. I could not verify a copy date for it, and a date I cannot verify is a date I do not say. The second limit has a name on it. Justin Martyr wrote of a phylactery, characters engraved on very thin parchment, in his dialogue with Trypho, chapter 46. That is 2nd century. It corroborates. It does not establish. The things in the ground do that. Thayer records phylacterion used of parchment strips carrying Exodus 13, verses 1 to 10 and 11 to 16, Deuteronomy 6, verses 4 to 9, and Deuteronomy 11, verses 13 to 21. Keep that separate from the dig. Thayer is a lexicon entry about a practice. The parchments are objects with fine sights, and they are the stronger of the 2. But read the list again. Deuteronomy 6, verses 4 to 9. Verse 8 sits inside it. The strips are scripture, and the verse this whole argument turns on is on them. And Matthew wrote phylacteria in his 23rd chapter, phylacteries, a word that occurs 1 time in the entire New Testament. You can count it yourself. The practice is in the ground and it is in the Greek text. So read the command those strips were made to obey. 6 Hebrew words in one verse, and one of them has never been securely traced to a root. Moses wrote kashar to bind, ot, a sign, yad, hand, totafot, the word your English Bible prints as frontlets, bain, between, and ayin, eye. Moses put bain and ayin together, between your eyes. There is a trap 7 verses earlier. Moses wrote zikaron at Exodus 13, verse 9, a memorial. Moses wrote totafot at verse 16. Anyone quoting those 2 verses as one command is building on sand. And Thayer's list already knows where that seam falls. It does not treat Exodus 13 as one passage. It breaks the chapter in 2, verses 1 to 10, and then verses 11 to 16, cut apart at the exact point where Moses stops writing zikaron and starts writing totafot. The strips carry both halves, and the 2 halves are not using the same word. That division is not mine. It is printed in the lexicon entry, and you can go and read it. And the strongest objection to this whole line sits inside Brown Driver Briggs itself. Brown Driver Briggs holds that Deuteronomy 6, verse 8 was originally figurative. Bind these words as a sign, meaning keep them in front of you, not strap them to your skull. That is contested, and it is a live disagreement between serious men. It also does not touch the argument. Figurative or literal, location language is still location language, and the parchments settle that by the 1st century somebody was doing it with leather. Moses wrote bin ineka, between your eyes. 6 words in that verse, and not one of them is a word for forehead. And the word Moses wrote as totafot, the one your Bible prints as frontlets, stands in 3 verses in the entire Hebrew Bible, and Brown Driver Briggs and Strong's both trace it to a root that no longer exists in the language. 3 verses. Exodus 13, verse 16. Deuteronomy 6, verse 8. Deuteronomy 11, verse 18. Every one of the 3 sits inside a passage the strips carry, and every one of the 3 is a location instruction. You can count it yourself. Hold on to the number 8. John did not split those 8 evenly by accident. Then open the same verse in a modern English Bible. 5 translations, 1 verse, and they do not all print the same body part. The Hebrew has not moved. Between the eyes is the forehead. A translator who prints forehead there is not hiding anything and is not part of anything, and I am not going to pretend otherwise to make this episode louder. It is a defensible rendering. A defensible decision still does work downstream. Print forehead at Deuteronomy 6 and print forehead at Revelation 13, and the 2 verses look like the same phrase. They are not the same phrase in Hebrew, and they are not the same phrase in Greek. The parallel that feels settled was made in English. By itself, this proves nothing about John. It only removes the reason the parallel felt established before anybody checked it. The Greek has to carry the rest, and if the Greek does not carry it, I have nothing. And there is nobody to accuse here. Nothing was altered in Revelation. No council touched it, no edition rewrote it, and I am not handing you a villain I cannot name. The King James Version, the New King James Version, and the English Standard Version print between the eyes. The New International Version and the New American Standard Bible print forehead. Same verse, same Hebrew, 2 different body parts on the page, and the one you grew up reading decided which parallel looked obvious before you ever opened Revelation. Now do the same thing in Greek. If John was reaching back to Moses' command when he wrote Revelation 13, the Greek Old Testament his readers used should hand him the words. One of the 2 body parts matches, the other does not. The Septuagint translators rendered Deuteronomy 6, verse 8 as a sign upon your hand and immovable before your eyes. The hand matches. John wrote the hand word too at Revelation 13, verse 16. Half a match is still a match, and a great deal of illusion works exactly like that, with one word carrying the echo and the rest running loose. Then look at which half matched. The word that is shared is the ordinary one. Hand is everywhere, in both testaments. The word that is missing is the distinctive one. An illusion that drops the distinctive term and keeps the common one is the weakest kind of illusion there is. And John was not short of the word, because he had written metapon 8 times. The Septuagint translators wrote eseliutin pro ophthalmon so at Deuteronomy 6 verse 8, immovable before your eyes. The The Septuagint translators did not put metapon there. The one word that would have tied Revelation 13 to Moses' command is the one word that is not in the verse, and Brenton's edition is free. You can put the two of them side by side tonight. So, where does John's forehead word come from? It is in the Greek Old Testament. It is not in Deuteronomy. It is in a scene where a man walks through a city putting a mark on people, and the entire point of the mark is which side they are on. Ezekiel 9 is a marking scene. A man with a writer's inkhorn goes through Jerusalem and puts a mark on the people who are to be spared, and everyone without it is cut down behind him. The mark is not equipment and it is not decoration. It is a designation of side. 2 body parts, 2 owners, and John has already written one of those markings down long before he reaches chapter 13. The strongest version of the objection is that John is drawing on Deuteronomy and Ezekiel at the same time. That is not a foolish position. Writers echo more than one text at once, and Revelation echoes half the Hebrew Bible inside a single chapter. But an echo is made of words, and the vocabulary is shared with only one of the two. And Ezekiel's scene is missing something John has. Ezekiel has a marker, and the marked, and no rival marker. Nobody is putting a competing mark on anybody. John has 2 of them working the same 2 body parts against each other. So John is doing something with that word that Ezekiel did not do. The Septuagint translators rendered Ezekiel's metzach with metapon at Ezekiel 9 verse 4. Set a mark upon the foreheads of the men. That is the word John wrote 8 times, and the scene it comes out of is not a scene about scrolls on the head. It is a scene about who belongs to whom. And then John does one more thing Moses did not do. He picks a side. Moses left it open. The Greek Old Testament left it open. Revelation 13 does not. The loudest objection in the room is that everybody knows the strap goes on the left arm, which makes a right hand in Revelation 13 either a mismatch or a deliberate inversion, depending on who is telling it. Both of those readings need the left arm rule to be older than John. Here is what I could not do. I could not find a first-century source for that rule. Not that none exists, that this search did not produce one, and a negative finding is only ever as strong as the search behind it. So take the tractate and go looking, because that is the seam in this episode. Both branches named. If the rule is later than John, a right hand is not a contradiction of the practice. It is a specification the practice had not made yet. If the rule is earlier than John, this reading has to answer a far harder question than the one I have answered. John wrote Dexius, the right hand. Moses did not name a side, the Septuagint translators did not name a side, and the rule that puts the strap on the weak arm is argued out by the rabbis in the Gemara. At Menachot 36b and 37a, from reading Yadcha as Yad Keha, the weak hand, and the Gemara carries 3 competing derivations in that one passage. No first-century source for it turned up here. If you find one, this is the place to break me. Now go back and get the 8 because a count is not an argument until you can see what is being counted. John wrote metapon 8 times and never once outside Revelation. Here is where the 8 fall and who owns each one. Revelation 7 verse 3, a seal on the foreheads of the servants of God, God's side. Revelation 14 verse 1, the Father's name written on foreheads, God's side. Revelation 22 verse 4, his name in their foreheads, God's side. Revelation 9 verse 4, the ones who do not have the seal of God on their foreheads. God's side again, named by who is without it, and the absence is doing exactly as much work as the presence. 4. Revelation 13 verse 16, the mark on the right hand or on the forehead, the beast side. Revelation 14 verse 9, whoever receives the mark on his forehead or on his hand, the beast's side. Revelation 17 verse 5, a name written on her forehead, Babylon, the beast's side. Revelation 20 verse 4, the ones who had not received the mark on their foreheads, the beast's side, named by who is without it. 4. 8 verses, 1 word, 1 body part, and a split straight down the middle. 1 on each side names the thing by who does not have it. That is not the distribution of a word for equipment. Nobody writes 8 verses about a device and spends 2 of them on who is not wearing one. That is the distribution of a word for allegiance, and every one of the 8 is countable in an evening. which leaves the marks themselves, and John did not use one word for both of them. John wrote sphragizo, to seal, for God's servants at Revelation 7, verse 3. A seal is pressed. It leaves the impression of whoever owns the ring, and the ring is the point. John wrote charagma for the beasts at Revelation 13, verse 16. Thayer glosses charagma as a stamp, an imprinted mark, and traces it to charasso, to engrave. Strong's has it as a scratch or an etching, a stamp, a badge of servitude. Read that last phrase again. A badge of servitude. That is a lexicon gloss, not my commentary, and it costs nothing to look at. 2 words for 2 marks, and both of them are words about who owns the thing they are pressed into. Neither of them is a word about mechanism. A seal and an engraving are both answers to the question whose, and neither is an answer to the question how. And then there is the one place charagma stands outside Revelation, one place in the entire New Testament. Luke wrote it at Acts 17, verse 29, of a God carved by human craft, not a machine, an image cut by hand of something men had decided to belong to. Put every one of those on the table at once. Moses wrote 6 words at Deuteronomy 6, verse 8, and not one of them is a word for forehead. He wrote b'nei necha, between your eyes. The Septuagint translators rendered that as a saliuton pro ophthalmon so, immovable before your eyes, and they did not put metapon in the verse. The one word that would have tied Revelation 13 back to Moses' command is the one word that is not there. The Septuagint translators did put metapon into Ezekiel 9, verse 4, for Ezekiel's metzach. Set a mark upon the foreheads of the men, a marking scene, a marker, and a designation of side. So the forehead word John wrote came out of that scene, not out of Moses' command about the scrolls. 8 verses, 4 and 4, God's side and the beasts. One word pressed like a seal and one word cut like an engraving on the same piece of skin pointing at opposite owners. Revelation 13 is not describing a device. It is describing whose you are. That is not the same as telling you what the mark will turn out to be. I cannot do that, and neither can anybody else from this vocabulary. What is on the table is that John wrote no word for a device, and that the device was carried into the chapter from outside it. Now break it. Open Blue Letter Bible and pull the lexicon entry for John's metapon. The number is on screen. Count the verses. If it stands anywhere outside Revelation, the primary receipt is dead. Then take the 8 I read out and check the owner of each one. If the split is not 4 and 4, the reading is wrong, and I want to know. Pull John's charagma, confirm the one occurrence outside Revelation, and read Acts 17, verse 29 for yourself. Open the Deuteronomy 6, verse 8 interlinear, and check the 6 Hebrew words against what I said. Then read the King James. The New King James, the English Standard, the New International, and the New American Standard side by side, and see which of them print forehead. Then Brenton's Septuagint at Deuteronomy 6, verse 8. If the Septuagint translators put metapon in that verse, the bridge I just built is wrong. Then Brenton at Ezekiel 9, verse 4, and look for the Septuagint translators epita metopa. If it is absent, the whole thing collapses. If Moses wrote totafot in more than 3 verses, the rarity claim breaks. If Matthew's phylacteria turns up anywhere else in the New Testament, the attestation breaks. And Menachot 36b and 37a. Find a first-century source for the left-arm rule, and the last thing I showed you has to be rebuilt from the ground. You can count it yourself. One word came out of a marking scene in Ezekiel. The other came out of a slave stamp. Paul wrote stigmata at Galatians 6, verse 17, the branded mark a slave or a soldier carried to show whose he was, and John did not write that word in Revelation 13.